Welcome to Troubleshooting Innovation, a commercial baking podcast, sponsored by Lalamun Baking, a fermentation-based ingredient supplier committed to reinforcing the goodness of grain. I'm your host, Joni Spencer, Editor-in-Chief of Commercial Baking. This season, I'm speaking with Julie Miller-Jones, a member of the Grain Foods Foundation Scientific Advisory Board, and Charlotte Martin, registered dietitian and consultant for the Grain Foods Foundation. And we are debunking bread myths to help bakers develop delicious, healthy, grain-based products and help them educate their consumers on the health benefits of bread. In this episode, we get to know our experts and dive into the first myth, carbs versus calories. Julie and Charlotte, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
You're so welcome.
Thank you for having us.
I am really excited to spend these next 5 weeks with you. I've been in the industry for about 15 years, and so I've had my share of hearing myths and seeing their impact on commercial bakery producers. And I'm just really excited to dive into them and dig into what's true and what can help bakers produce really great products that are also really good for our bodies. So let's just first get to know you better. Julie, I'm going to start with you. You have such a long history with the Grain Foods Foundation and in the baking industry. Can you just sort of give me a brief recap on what that background looks like?
Well, I both have a PhD in nutrition and food science, and I taught dietitians and I taught home economists. So I have a little bit of consumer. In fact, I call myself a mile wide and an inch deep.
I love it.
Because I taught so many different things. I was at a small university, and so I would teach everything from beginning food science to nutritional biochemistry in the chemistry department to intercultural food patterns or experimental food. So unlike a lot of PhDs that you might meet who know the infinite amount about folic acid, it down to how the reaction occurs. So my real talent, I think, is the ability to take scientific information and make MDs understand it and make consumers understand it, and all the way in between. I got into grains because on this picture behind me, the tall building is where I live. And it's on the Mississippi. And the Mississippi is where flour milling in the United States really began and thrived. And so because I'm from the Mill City, early on in my career back in the 1970s, I joined the American Association of Cereal Chemists because all of the people from the big companies such as General Mills and Pillsbury and Multifoods, they were all here. And so because of that, I did a lot of speeches for them and went to meetings and eventually became the president of the American Association of Cereal Chemists International. As that, I wrote a regular column on what's new in anything about grains from across the spectrum. And I joined GFF the year it began and have been with them from early 2000s. So partly I just have all that because I'm old.
You're experienced.
That's right.
So Charlotte, you bring a very different perspective. And that's one thing I'm really excited about this conversation is because we have two really intelligent but very different perspectives on bread, and both who contribute greatly to the Grain Foods Foundation and their efforts. You're a registered dietitian and you also have a strong digital presence. So can you sort of share your background and how you developed this passion to help people develop a healthy relationship with food? And then how did you get involved with GFF?
Sure. So interestingly, my passion for nutrition started with a fascination for the paleo diet in college, which is funny considering I'm such a huge proponent of carbs and grains now. I actually did my honors project on the paleo diet. So I put professors on the paleo diet. And clearly my nutrition philosophy has changed a lot. I think at that time, there was definitely a social media presence, but it wasn't as big as it is today. And so I realized, I was kind of falling into these nutrition myths of carbs are bad. And really, I just realized that a lot of people just don't know how and what to eat to support optimal health. And so that was when I decided that nutrition was what I wanted to do. And my first job as a dietitian kind of just threw me out there into many different roles. I was working on the product development side, but then I was also working on the consumer side. And so that's how I started getting into nutrition education on social media and also television. And then I just kind of ran with it. And it's been great because as much as I hate that there are so many myths out there on social media and just so much nutrition misinformation, it keeps me in business. So I am just constantly debunking nutrition myths and just trying to educate my followers who have been severely misinformed. And then I got involved with GFF a few years ago. They had reached out about helping provide some quotes for digital magazines. And so I was doing that with them for a little while. And then now I'm also doing some social media content and other random little things with them. And it's been a great partnership, a great mutually beneficial partnership.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes, I have really appreciated what you have brought to the thought leadership behind GFF. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you both, and providing these very specific and important perspectives on this. So I'm going to ask sort of a pre-question before we dive really into this. You both are well-versed in nutrition on the consumer side. So I'm curious, based on your experience, what would you say are the most important things that commercial bakers need to know about people's relationship with grain-based foods? Like, what are the obstacles that these producers are working against?
I think, throughout my career, it's gotten worse and worse. There are more and more obstacles. And if only we could go back to that bread and grains are the staff of life. It's what we need to do for sustainability. It's what we need to do for nutrition. Instead, we have really good stuff on the web, but I think the fact that we have the web is that you have, I eat, therefore I know, and I write a blog. And the more outrageous it sounds, the better it sells. And the more frightened people are of what they have done before. So I think we have all these myths, low carb, paleo is really a low carb. All of those have been going on since I've been teaching, but they always come up with a new gimmick, a new name. And that has always been in my career, bashing of the bread industry and the grain industry just because they're carbohydrate containing. Then we had the anti-gluten thing. So various famous people glom onto, and then that gets people following these cockamamie diets.
Charlotte, what about you?
Sure. To add to what Julie said, I find that thanks to social media, a lot of people these days have become carbophobes. They don't necessarily stop eating carbs, but they're afraid of them. And oftentimes they feel guilty after eating carb-rich foods like bread. So it's been very hard to reframe that mindset, especially like Julie mentioned, since the past several decades have just been one low-carb diet after the other. And now we're facing the carnivore diet and keto, which are just basically no carbs. So it has been challenging, and consumers definitely, I mean, they've become terrified of bread. And you'll also see a lot, what I see on social media is these proponents of these low carb lifestyles and diets kind of misinterpreting the research on grains to fit their agenda. And so that doesn't help either. And so it has been challenging, but I think we have a lot of health professionals and food scientists on social media who have developed a large presence who are kind of combating that misinformation.
Okay, so based on that, I'm ready to sort of dig into this and uncover what bakers can do to overcome these misconceptions. So this first episode, what I want to unpack is the perceptions that inevitably come with carbs and calories. So there's this myth that bread and carbs lead to weight gain, but the truth is serving sizes are playing more of a role than the actual bread intake. What exactly does that mean? Like, can you guys elaborate on that for me?
Sure, I can start on this one. This myth that bread and carbs directly lead to weight gain is definitely an oversimplification. In reality, weight gain is the result of consuming more calories than your body uses, and that's regardless of the source of these calories. So high carb foods, like any other food group, only contribute to weight gain when they're consumed in quantities that exceed our body's caloric needs. So it's not the bread or carbs themselves that are inherently fattening, but rather that total caloric intake and the serving sizes that matter. So when consumed in moderation and as part of a balanced diet, bread will not automatically lead to weight gain. It's just important to focus on portion control and overall caloric balance instead of, like I see on social media a lot, eliminating specific foods or food groups like carbs and bread.
I wish we could reframe the myth. I totally agree with Charlotte. I wish we could reframe the myth to a truth. And the truth is that calories, too many calories, it's the calories, stupid. They cause the weight gain. For 50 years of my career, we beat the dead horse, fat. Fat was making us fat because it has 9 calories per gram and carbs don't. Too many calories, I don't care. Too much protein can make you fat. And so we need to really reframe that calories, not just carbs, but it's calories. That the idea that calories don't count is really preposterous. And that a lot of the diet books tell you, you don't need to count calories, you don't need to exercise. Well, that is silly. That is just stupid. So if we could just reframe that myth that it's the calories, stupid, that we could actually change what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think back to when Atkins sort of came on the scene and it was, oh, well, if you cut out carbs, then you can eat all the bacon and cheese that you want. But that's not true. If you eat too much bacon and cheese, you're not going to lose weight just because you're not eating bread. Then from a product development standpoint, how do you think bakers can be a part of the solution when you're thinking about calorie intake rather than carb intake?
The trouble is that people want to believe that some sort of 3-word sentence, don't eat X or do eat X, that's what they want. But if you continue wanting that, you'll never reach the goal. And the goal is that the dietary guidelines and the USDA MyPlate or the Mediterranean diet have acres of research that show that when you balance the food groups, including breads and cereals, including fruit, when you balance all those things, you are healthier, you are more likely to be of normal weight. They did the DASH diet. That's been going on since 1997. And when people ate that, not only did they cut their blood pressure medicine in half, and many came off of it, they lost weight, they had reduced risk of cancer, reduced risk of coronary. So if only we could kind of say there is no magic talisman in a 3-word don't eat X. What you really need to concentrate on is using the 4 food groups in the right way. And balance means that you have to pick things from different groups. And until we do that, we will still be chasing our tails and gaining weight.
I talked to a baker or a person who was at a high level of leadership in a baking company, and they made a decision to start selling half loaves. And they were very concerned that they were going to lose money if they were selling smaller loaves. And they flew off the shelves, and their profits didn't change in selling half loaves. So I feel like that's a really great part of the solution when we're talking about calorie intake. If bakers can look at their packaging sizes, especially when consumers are also keeping waste top of mind, those two can work in tandem.
That's actually a great point, Joni. I've been noticing that in the grocery stores near me. A couple of different brands have been offering those half loaves, which I think is a great idea. And another thing is, I don't know if you've seen those, I think like Dave's Killer Bread does it, but the ultra thin slices, they're smaller because I do feel like just portions in general of many products have just increased over the years. And so it's nice to have that option because, every time you make a sandwich or have a piece of toast, you don't have to eat this huge piece. And so to give people the option to choose, to still get that bread fix in, but to be able to choose a smaller slice, especially if they're not that hungry. And, usually when it's in front of you, like if your only option is this thick, huge slice of bread, you're going to eat the whole thing. So offering consumers different sizes, I think, is a great idea.
I think just we have many 1 and 2 person families now. That's also really helpful because optimal bread is not put in the fridge. It's left on the counter. And the way I deal with that is I cut the loaf in half and then take it out as we need it so that it always is the least stale. So I think it's a winner from the not having too much around, but it's also a winner for the budget and the environment. So I think that's a really great solution. I think other solutions that some bakers have tried, they've done the thinner buns, they've done mini bagels. I think most people don't know that bagels are almost 3.5 slices of bread. Some people, when you ask them how much grain did you have, well, I just had 1 bagel. And they don't realize that bagels are half proofed so that when they're boiled in the water and then which has a little lye in it to give it the shiny surface, that really is a lot more dough than you'd really get if you were actually eating bread. We have a little bit of education to do there too, but just ways to actually encourage smaller sizes, I think, is a really good idea.
Yeah, I agree. Wellman Baking is proud to sponsor this season of Troubleshooting Innovation. As a supplier to the baking industry and member of the Grain Foods Foundation, Lallemand is committed to reinforcing the goodness of grain and sharing credible sources of information to communicate the health benefits of bread. So, for years, there's also been this rhetoric around white bread that it just contains empty calories with no nutritional value. Is that true?
Well, half the world gets 50% of their calories from grains. And if you're in a developing country, it's more than that. If we're really promoting a sustainable and a plant-based diet, that's where grains need to stay. When we start moving to, we're going to eat more protein, which is what a lot of people are trying to do right now, that's the most economically and environmentally expensive way we can eat. So we need to dial back and look at how can we use the bread and why is bread there? And bread is there because it provides so many nutrients. A study with N. Haynes showed that if we eliminated fortified bread products, we would reduce the number of people who are meeting the niacin requirement. Right now, 50% eat what we call the estimated average requirement, which is we consider the minimum you need. Without fortification, over 50% don't meet the estimated average requirement. With fortification, only 10% don't meet it. That's one nutrient. With folate, 90% don't meet it. And with folate added to bread, under 10% don't meet it. We can do that for iron. We can do it for folate. We can do it for niacin. So people discount the importance of fortified white bread and grain products to their peril.
So where do you think the opportunities are? How can bakers look at their formulas and reformulate to increase nutrients like fiber in their products? Some people say whole wheat bread is the answer, but do both types, white bread and whole wheat bread, do they need to look at their formulas and increase those nutrients?
I think one option is experimenting with partial substitution of refined flour with whole grain flour in white bread. And I know some bread manufacturers are already doing that because then you can improve the nutritional value in terms of things like fiber, yes, without significantly altering the traditional taste and texture of white bread. I think the issue there, though, lies in that sometimes they use misleading wording on the packaging. So they'll call the bread multigrain or say made with whole grains. And then consumers often interpret that as the bread being completely 100% whole grain, which I find that happens quite frequently. But yeah, I think experimenting with different flours, and I know I already mentioned Dave's Killer Bread. I swear I don't work for them, but I think they're very innovative in their breads they make, and they are great at marketing. But they have a white bread that uses both refined and whole wheat flours. They have like enriched wheat flour and whole wheat flour, in addition to, I think it was like barley and spelt and rye and quinoa flours. And so it adds like a tiny little bit of fiber and probably some other micronutrients, but it still looks like white bread and tastes like white bread. And so I think that's a good option there.
The myth is that white bread doesn't give any fiber, and nothing could be further from the truth. In that, 50% of the fiber intake that we get comes from white bread because we eat it so frequently. And so this idea that white bread is devoid of both nutrients and fiber is just wrong. And then in terms of what bakers can do, I know that there's research at Kansas State and other universities where they're looking at actually taking varietals that naturally have higher fiber content and using those. I know that some companies are using resistant starch, which is a source of fiber. And so it functions like starch in the grain. If you use too much, you get a gritty feeling. But to actually use resistant starch, which will be called like modified, it can be called modified cornstarch, so that it won't have a label name that is off-putting to most. And in addition to all the wonderful ways that Charlotte suggested by blending and making those sound alluring, using white whole wheat, which looks more like regular whole wheat in terms of color. It looks like white bread rather than darkly colored with the ones that are much higher in polyphenolics. But so those are just some tactics that you can use. And I think if we just talk about under 5% of the people meet the fiber requirement, it's so important for all kinds of health. If we could just make people think calories do count and they aren't getting enough fiber, I would die happy.
So I keep thinking about, so I'm a mom. I have a son who is 14. I've spent the last 13 years trying to get him to eat what's good for him, get him to eat his veggies. And I feel like that's what we're trying to accomplish with Americans, just like eat what's good for you. And there are tons of little strategies and tricks that, Charlotte, I'm sure you are well versed in like tricking our kids to eat their vegetables. So what is the key to getting consumers to eat what's good for them when it comes to bread?
I think that's a great question. And when it comes to, children specifically, I would think that packaging plays a big role here. Interactive packaging that features fun characters. So even if it's, like a whole grain bread, fun characters, bright colors, interactive elements that could make it more attractive to children. And then I think it's about making that healthy eating a fun and enjoyable experience. So another thing bakers could do is engage in educational and promotional activities aimed at children. So this could involve hosting baking workshops for kids where they learn the benefits of healthy eating and get hands-on experience in the bread making process. And that's also another time where they can educate children and also parents on the benefits of bread and what goes between the bread.
I love that. I have to put a mental pin in that comment because in a couple of episodes, we're going to talk about misconceptions around like processing. And so I need to remember that in thinking about some transparency around processing is not a bad word, and that we can share and give tours and things like that.
I think you could also have games like, have you had your fiber today? Where you could have classrooms trying to say who got the most fiber today and what did you get it from, so that you know it comes only from plant foods, and that grains are an important source and fruits and vegetables are an important source. And by putting together a sandwich that has fruits and vegetables and grains, and you could support school programs or something with that, or how we creatively did it, that those might be fun ideas that would get you publicity and actually might help improve children's nutrition.
I love it. I love it. Okay. I have one last question that's sort of maybe an ethereal question here. We're going to close it out with this discussion. Is it realistic to envision a future where bread correlates with healthy weight? Can we get there? What will it take to get there?
I certainly think so. I think it's realistic, maybe not in the near future, but I think really what's most important here is education. We just need to change this narrative around bread by dispelling the myths and highlighting how certain types of bread can be a healthy part of our diet. And I think this involves some transparent labeling and proactive communication about the benefits of these healthier options. And I think a lot of that could easily be done via social media campaigns, since so much marketing is done on social media. And then really just a cultural shift in how we perceive and consume bread is essential. So encouraging moderation and understanding that role of bread in a balanced diet. And it's really just about educating on making informed choices. So it's not just about the type of bread we eat, but also about the portion sizes and how we incorporate it into our overall diet. How are we serving it? Is it a sandwich? What else are we serving the bread with? Because again, sometimes it's more important and it's more about what is between those slices than actually the bread itself when it comes to weight management.
I'd like to modify your dream. I think she did a great job, but I would like it to be a future where diet correlates with health rather than just bread. Because if we get the bread right and the other things wrong, it won't be a healthy weight or a healthy diet. So I really am a whole diet person, that I believe you can have cake on your birthday. I think you should have cake on your birthday, but I don't think you should eat cake every day. And so how can we put together the idea that choosing the right things regularly in the right mix brings about healthy diets, overall health, and healthy weights? And until we do that, we will be chasing myth after myth after myth. I've watched people do it, different kinds of myths, and they only got fatter. And then so until we really say, I'm going to take the USDA plate, the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, which includes all the elements of the diet in the right amounts.
Do you think we can? Do you think Americans can get to that balance?
Can versus will.
True.
2/3 of the population are overweight. And when you ask people if they have a good diet, 2/3 of the people say yes. So somebody's lying. Until we look at ourselves and say, we are the problem. I am not doing this right. It's not because XYZ company made me eat this food. I chose to eat it. It was an enjoyable choice, but I shouldn't do it all the time. And until we actually get there, I think we can. I'm not sure we have the will. I hope Charlotte has a much more, she has the younger optimism to go forward. Charlotte, go with it.
I know, but I also have the pessimism of being on social media all the time and just seeing how confusing nutrition messaging in general is. I have to agree with you. I think we could potentially, but I don't know. I think it will take a lot, just because nutrition messaging in general in the media is just all over the place. And consumers are confused. They're so focused on, avoiding seed oils that they completely just miss the concept of consuming a balanced diet rich in whole grains and legumes and produce. And so I don't know that we can get there anytime soon, but I think it is promising that we do have a lot of nutrition experts who are growing a voice and providing sound nutrition information. So maybe.
What gives me hope is that in my career span, I did see if everybody would only eat less fat, we would be healthier. So that brought on the cookies that people said they had no fat and they ate the whole package. And we're going to do it with carbs now. And I think it's going to go on for a while longer. And now protein is the salvation. And then we're probably going to say, well, actually, that has some risks too. But maybe we will get smarter. Maybe the message of overall diet, if we could get somebody who is famous but not terribly controversial to lead the charge, maybe that would be helpful. That, I eat like this and I choose everything, then maybe we'd be healthy. I don't know, but we may just need a Pied Piper to bring us out of what our demons are.
Well, I do think that the good news is people want to learn about their food, but the bad news is that people want to learn about their food as well. And that's where they're consuming good information and misinformation. So I do think that people like you, Charlotte, who are out there in the social media and in the digital space, communicating good information. And if we can teach bakers not only how to develop good products that are healthy, but also communicate that their products are healthy and enjoyable to consume, I think we can get there. But I agree, it's probably not going to be tomorrow, but I think at some point we can get there. We just need to fight the good fight and continue putting out good information.
I know before social media, there was an article which looked at media in general, and they found 1 out of 5 pieces of information was nutritionally accurate. I assume that with the web, which is impossible to monitor, but it's probably 1 out of every 1,000 now. And people will go to where their fears are. And they also want to have lost the weight yesterday. And someone says, well, if you just do X, you'll be thinner. People so much want to believe that. But if we can get just a list of communicators that the baking industry says these people in general give reliable information, that might be really helpful. Or where can the average baker go? And then the baker could have a thing in their shop window or in their marketing that says, today's tip from Charlotte, today's tip from Julie, so that they're not constantly being bombarded by information that is incorrect.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, ladies, thank you so much for such a compelling first episode. It was great just getting to know you, and we really just skimmed the surface on this discussion around myths. And I'm really looking forward to the next 4 weeks. We're going to dive into myths around the glycemic index, around sodium intake, processing, and then we're going to look at Americans' relationship with sandwiches and how that's even getting some myths thrown its way. And then we're going to close out this season talking about women's health. And that's really important. And I'm excited to dive into how bread and grain-based foods can support women's health as well. So I'm so looking forward to these next few weeks with you and just really tapping your brains. And next week, we are going to talk about bread's connection to the glycemic index. So I look forward to that. Thank you for listening to Troubleshooting Innovation. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Lallemand Baking. Delivering solutions to bakers across the globe, Lallemand Baking is raising baking standards.